The stadium roars echoed through Daniel Martinez's small apartment as he gripped the remote with white knuckles. The Golden Eagles were losing again, and with each missed shot, something dark stirred within him. "Come on, you idiots!" he screamed at the screen. "How hard is it to kick a ball into a net?" In the kitchen, Sarah Martinez flinched, pulling 8-year-old Tommy closer. She knew that tone. She knew what came next. The final whistle blew. The Golden Eagles had lost 2-0. Daniel's beloved team had crushed his dreams again, and Sarah would pay the price. "Sarah!" Daniel's voice boomed like thunder. "Where the hell are you? This is your fault." Logic had abandoned Daniel years ago when it came to his team. Every loss was personal. Every defeat was betrayal. Someone had to suffer. Sarah whispered to Tommy, "Go to your room, baby. Put on your headphones." The boy knew the routine. Daniel stumbled into the kitchen, face flushed with rage and alcohol. Beer bottles told the story of his descent. "Did you hear me calling you?" "Daniel, please," Sarah began. "Tommy's here. He can hear everything." "I don't give a damn about Tommy right now." His voice cracked with fury. 20 years, Sarah. 20 years following this team, and they repay me like this." Something in Daniel's eyes tonight was different, darker, more dangerous than ever. If you've ever felt trapped in a situation that seemed impossible to escape, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because what happens next will show you that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the most unexpected transformations. "They lost because you weren't supporting me," Daniel continued, logic twisted by obsession. "A real wife would understand what this means." Sarah backed against the refrigerator as Daniel stepped closer. She could smell the alcohol, see veins bulging in his forehead. This wasn't the man she'd married. This wasn't the father who read bedtime stories to Tommy. "Daniel, you're scaring me," she whispered. "Good," he replied with eerie calm. "Maybe if you're scared, you'll remember your place." What Sarah didn't know was that Daniel's obsession ran deeper than anyone could imagine. There was something buried in his past, something that happened on a night like this, that had twisted his love for the game into something monstrous. The first blow came without warning. Sarah's head snapped as Daniel's palm connected with her cheek, echoing through the kitchen. The pain was sharp, but nothing compared to seeing Tommy's bedroom door crack open, one terrified eye peering out. "Go back to your room, Tommy!" she managed to shout before Daniel grabbed her shoulders. "Look what you made me do," Daniel hissed, shaking her roughly. "If you had supported me, none of this would be happening." Through tears, Sarah saw something that terrified her more than his fists, the complete absence of the man she'd once loved. In his place stood a stranger, consumed by obsession that had rotted him from the inside. From his bedroom, Tommy pressed his hands against his ears, but couldn't block out his mother's cries or his father's threats. At 8 years old, he was learning that love could hurt, that families could be dangerous, and that soccer matches were the beginning of nightmares. As Daniel's rage poured out like a broken dam, none of them realized this night would be different. This night would set in motion events that would either destroy their family forever or force Daniel to confront the demons feeding on his soul for decades. The Golden Eagles had lost again, but the real game was just beginning. Block 2. The Pattern of Destruction. 3 months earlier, the signs were written like invisible scars. Sarah Martinez sat outside Tommy's school, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Foundation makeup couldn't hide the yellowing bruise along her jawline, a souvenir from the Golden Eagles' last defeat. Mrs. Martinez, Tommy's teacher, Ms. Henderson, had pulled her aside the week before. "Tommy seems distracted lately. Yesterday he asked if all daddies get angry when they watch sports." The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. How do you explain that your 8-year-old has been conditioned to expect violence every weekend during football season? Sarah remembered when she realized her marriage had become a prison. After the Golden Eagles' championship loss 2 years ago, Daniel had punched a hole through their bedroom wall. When Tommy asked about the damage, Daniel told him, "Sometimes things get broken when people don't try hard enough to win." That moment, Sarah understood Daniel wasn't just teaching Tommy about football. He was teaching him that violence was an acceptable response to disappointment, passing down a legacy of pain that would poison their son's understanding of love and family. The pattern had become predictable as changing seasons. During off-season, Daniel was almost normal. He worked construction, came home tired but peaceful, helped Tommy with homework, even took Sarah to dinner. Those months gave her hope that maybe the Daniel she'd loved was still buried beneath the obsession. But as soon as preseason started, the transformation began. Daniel would spend hours analyzing statistics, memorizing players, building impossible expectations. He'd talk about their year and how this time would be different. The hope in his eyes was almost beautiful, if you didn't know what came next. The first loss of each season was like watching a dam burst. All of Daniel's optimism would curdle into rage, and Sarah and Tommy became repositories for his disappointment. Violence would start small. Raised voices slammed doors, thrown bottles. But with each loss, Daniel's fury intensified. By mid-season, Sarah had learned to recognize warning signs. She could tell how badly the Golden Eagles were losing by the volume of Daniel's cursing. She'd started keeping a bag packed in her closet, filled with essentials for herself and Tommy, just in case they needed to leave quickly. Sarah's sister Carmen begged her to leave countless times. "He's going to kill you," Carmen would say during hushed phone calls. "Do you want your son to grow up thinking this is normal?" The question haunted Sarah because she could see the signs in Tommy. Her once bright boy had become quiet and withdrawn. He flinched when Daniel raised his voice. Worst of all, she'd caught Tommy hitting his stuffed animals after Daniel's episodes, mimicking his father's violent gestures with terrifying accuracy. But leaving seemed impossible. Daniel controlled their finances, isolated her from friends, and made it clear he'd never let them go. "You're mine," he would whisper after his worst episodes, overcome with temporary guilt. "You and Tommy belong to me. If you try to leave, I'll find you." The threats weren't empty. Sarah had seen Daniel's capability when his team lost. She'd witnessed him fight strangers who criticized the Golden Eagles. She'd watched him destroy furniture in rage fits. If he could do that to objects and strangers, what would he do to her and Tommy? Last month's incident was the worst yet. The Golden Eagles had blown a 3-goal lead. Daniel's fury was so intense, he'd grabbed Sarah by the throat, screaming it was her fault for jinxing the team by folding laundry instead of watching. Tommy had witnessed everything. For the first time, their son tried to intervene, pounding small fists against Daniel's legs, screaming, "Leave my mummy alone!" The pure terror in Tommy's eyes as Daniel turned attention to him was something Sarah knew would haunt her forever. That night, after Daniel passed out drunk, Sarah held Tommy while he cried, asking why Daddy hated them. She'd tried explaining Daddy didn't hate them, just felt sad about his team, but the words felt like lies. The worst part wasn't just physical violence. It was watching the man she'd loved disappear more each season, replaced by someone whose entire identity was wrapped up in athletes who didn't know he existed. Daniel had become a ghost of himself, haunting their home with rage and disappointment. Tonight felt different. As Sarah sat watching the bruise in her mirror, she realized she was tired of being afraid, tired of making excuses. Most of all, tired of watching her son learn that love was supposed to hurt. Tonight, when Daniel lost control again, Sarah Martinez was going to make a choice that would change all their lives forever. Block 3. The night everything changed. The Golden Eagles were down by 1 goal with 15 minutes left when Sarah Martinez realized this would be the last time she'd watch her husband's descent into madness. Something in the air felt electric with the tension that comes before lives change forever. Daniel sat on the couch's edge, body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Empty beer bottles surrounded him like fallen soldiers, his knuckles bloody from punching the armrest during frustrating plays. Sarah watched from the doorway, studying the man who once promised to protect her and Tommy. "Come on, you worthless garbage," Daniel screamed as the Golden Eagles missed another opportunity. My dead grandmother could play better. In his bedroom, Tommy was supposed to be sleeping, but Sarah could hear him moving around, probably packing his stuffed animals like he always did when Daddy got angry. At 8 years old, her son had learned to prepare for worst-case scenarios. 12 minutes remaining when Daniel turned with eyes glowing with fury she'd never seen. "Why are you standing there? Come support your team. Maybe if you cared about something that matters to me, they'd play better." Sarah had learned Daniel's game day logic, followed no rational pattern. In his mind, everything connected. Her actions, Tommy's behavior, even weather could influence the Golden Eagles' performance. Magical thinking taken to dangerous extremes. "Daniel, you've had enough to drink," Sarah said quietly. "Why don't we turn off the game and—" "Turn off the game?" Daniel's voice rose to a pitch she'd never heard. "This is the most important match of the season." 10 minutes left. Sarah could see Daniel's rage building like a storm gathering strength. His hands shook now, not from alcohol, but from sheer emotional force. She'd seen him angry before, violent before, but this felt different. Final. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," Daniel said, voice dropping to a whisper somehow more terrifying than shouting. "These players are letting me down. My team is letting me down. But you're supposed to be different. You're supposed to be here for me no matter what." 8 minutes. Sarah found herself thinking about the bag she'd packed and hidden in Tommy's closet. 3 changes of clothes, important documents, the small amount of cash she'd been saving. It wasn't much, but might be enough to get somewhere safe. The Golden Eagles mounted one final attack, and for a moment, Daniel's face lit up with hope. Sarah watched her husband transform, becoming the man she'd married, the father who used to sing lullabies. For 30 seconds, love returned to their home. Then the opposing team stole the ball and scored a second goal. The sound from Daniel wasn't human. It was a wounded animal's howl, primal and full of pain deeper than any football game. He stood so violently, he knocked over the coffee table, sending bottles crashing. "No!" he screamed at the television. "This can't be happening, not again." Sarah watched in horror as Daniel hurled a beer bottle at the wall, glass exploding in amber shards. Then he turned to look at her, and she knew with absolute certainty this time was different. This time, he might actually kill her. "This is your fault," Daniel said with deadly calm. "Every loss, every disappointment. It's because you don't believe. You don't support me. You're a curse on this house." He stepped toward her, and Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe it was seeing Tommy's door crack open, her son's terrified eye visible in darkness. Maybe it was realizing she'd spent so many years afraid she'd forgotten what it felt like to be brave. "No," Sarah said, voice stronger than it had been in years. "I'm not doing this anymore." Daniel stopped mid-step, confusion replacing rage. "What did you say?" "I said no." Sarah felt power returning with each word. "I'm not your punching bag anymore, Daniel. I'm not responsible for your team's failures, and I'm not going to let you destroy our son the way you've tried to destroy me." Confusion on Daniel's face transformed into something much more dangerous. "You don't get to say no to me. You don't get to abandon me when I need you most." But Sarah was already moving. She ran to Tommy's room, grabbed their packed bag, and scooped up her confused son. "We're leaving," she told him simply. "Right now." "Where are you going?" Daniel's voice followed them to the front door. "You can't leave me. You're my wife. Tommy's my son." Sarah paused at the door and turned to look at the man she'd once loved. He stood in their destroyed living room, surrounded by broken glass and empty bottles, his face a mask of rage and desperation. For just a moment, she saw a flash of the Daniel she'd married, confused, hurt, and deeply afraid. "I'm sorry," she whispered, meaning it. "I'm sorry this is what you became." Then she opened the door and walked into the night with Tommy in her arms, leaving Daniel alone with his obsession, his rage, and the crushing realization that the Golden Eagles' loss had just cost him everything that actually mattered. As they drove away, Tommy asked, "Are we coming back, Mummy?" Sarah looked in the rearview mirror at their house, where Daniel stood silhouetted in the doorway and made a promise that would change the course of all their lives. "No, baby," she said, "we're never coming back." Behind them, Daniel Martinez collapsed to his knees in his empty doorway, finally alone with the monster he'd become. The Golden Eagles had lost again, but this time, Daniel was the one who had lost everything. What he would do next would surprise everyone, including himself. Block 4. Denial and Self-Destruction. The morning after Sarah left, Daniel Martinez woke up on broken glass. The apartment looked like a war zone. Then it flooded back. The game, the loss, the fight, and the sound of his front door closing forever. "Sarah?" he called out, voice hoarse. "Sarah? Are you there?" Silence. Empty hangers in the closet, her makeup gone. Tommy's stuffed rabbit missing. "She's trying to scare me," Daniel muttered. "She'll be back." He called Sarah 17 times that first day. Each call went to voicemail. By afternoon, he was at Carmen's house, pounding on her door. "Send out my wife and son." A family doesn't live in fear, Daniel. A family doesn't hide bruises with makeup. The words hit like a blow. He stared at the closed door, suddenly seeing himself as Carmen must, a madman, demanding the return of a wife who had every right to run. But admitting that would mean admitting he was the monster. "This is temporary," he shouted. "She'll come home when she realizes she can't survive without me." But days passed. Sarah didn't come home. The apartment felt like a tomb. He stopped going to work. "Family emergency," Daniel mumbled to his boss. But Daniel didn't go to work tomorrow or the day after. Instead, he sat staring at the television where commentators dissected the Golden Eagles' latest loss. If you're going through a difficult time and feel like everything is falling apart, hit that like button, because sometimes we have to lose everything before we can find ourselves again. Without Sarah there to absorb his rage, Daniel turned it inward. He stopped showering, eating, cleaning. Empty beer bottles multiplied across every surface. On the 10th day, his boss called again. "Martinez, you haven't shown up for over a week. I have to let you go. You can't fire me. I've been with this company 8 years. I'm sorry, Daniel. Clear out your locker by Friday." The phone went dead. Daniel hurled it against the wall where it shattered, another broken thing in his broken home. That night, Daniel stood in Tommy's empty bedroom, holding his son's baseball glove. The Golden Eagles were playing their most important match, but for the first time in 20 years, Daniel couldn't watch. He pressed the glove to his face and breathed in the faint scent of his son's innocence. Tommy used to beg Daniel to play catch, but there was always a game on television. "I'm sorry, Tommy," Daniel whispered to the empty room. "Daddy's so sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. Sorry wouldn't fix the years of damage. Sorry was just another broken promise from a broken man who was finally beginning to understand that he had lost the only game that truly mattered. The Golden Eagles won that night, 3-1. Daniel found out the next morning when his neighbor mentioned it. For the first time in his adult life, his team's victory felt meaningless. He had no one to celebrate with. The win was hollow, empty, as lifeless as the apartment he could no longer call home. Block 5, the encounter with the past. 3 weeks after Sarah left, Daniel was stumbling out of Murphy's bar at 2 in the morning when he collided with a man walking his dog. "Whoa there, buddy. You okay?" Daniel looked up and found himself staring into a face that made his blood run cold. The man was in his 60s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked exactly like Daniel's father would have looked if he'd lived to see this age. "Dad," Daniel whispered. The stranger frowned. "Sorry, son. I think you've got me confused with someone else." Daniel's chest tightened with panic. He hadn't felt since he was 8 years old. This man wasn't his father, couldn't be his father. His father had been dead for 27 years, but the resemblance was so striking that Daniel felt like he was staring at a ghost. As Daniel stumbled home, memories began flooding back with terrifying clarity. Memories he'd spent decades trying to forget. He was 8 years old again, sitting next to his father in Eagles Stadium bleachers. It was the championship game, and the Golden Eagles were down by 1 point with 2 minutes left. Daniel's father, Miguel Martinez, had been drinking since noon, celebrating what he was certain would be their team's greatest victory. "This is it, mijo," Miguel had whispered, his breath reeking of beer and false hope. "When the Eagles win this championship, our luck is going to turn around." Miguel Martinez was a construction worker who'd never made more than minimum wage. But for 90 minutes every Sunday, when the Golden Eagles took the field, Miguel transformed into something larger than life. He became a warrior, a true believer, a man whose team's victories made him feel like he could conquer the world. 8-year-old Daniel had watched his father's face during that championship game, memorizing every expression, every surge of hope, every moment of crushing disappointment as the Eagles' dreams died on the field. When the final whistle blew and the Golden Eagles had lost 2-1, Miguel Martinez didn't just cry, he collapsed. "No," his father had whispered, tears streaming down his face. "No, this can't be happening. Not again." Daniel had never seen his father cry before. In his young mind, fathers were supposed to be invincible. But there in the stadium, Miguel Martinez looked smaller than his 8-year-old son had ever imagined possible. When they reached home, Daniel's mother, Elena, was waiting in the kitchen. She'd been married to Miguel for 12 years, and she knew how Golden Eagles' losses affected him. But this was different. This was the championship game. "How bad was it?" Elena asked quietly. Miguel looked at his wife as if he'd forgotten she existed. Then, without warning, he swept his arm across the kitchen table, sending plates and glasses crashing to the floor. 20 years, he screamed. 20 years I've been following this team, and they repay me like this." 8-year-old Daniel pressed himself against the kitchen wall, watching in terror as his father transformed into something unrecognizable. Miguel picked up a chair and hurled it across the room. "Miguel, please," Elena whispered. "Daniel's watching, you're scaring him." But Miguel was beyond reason, consumed by grief so profound it had twisted into rage. He turned to look at his son, and for a moment Daniel saw something in his father's eyes that would haunt him forever, a complete disconnection from reality. "This is your fault," Miguel said to his 8-year-old son, his voice deadly calm. "You brought bad luck. I should have gone alone." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. In his father's twisted logic, somehow a child's presence had influenced the game's outcome. "Miguel, that's enough." Elena stepped between her husband and son. "Don't blame a child for grown men's failures." But Miguel was already reaching for his coat. "I need air. I need to walk." "Don't leave," Elena pleaded. "Stay here with your family." Miguel paused at the door, looking back. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw a flicker of the father he knew, but then Miguel's expression hardened. "It's over. Everything we hoped for. It's all gone." Miguel Martinez walked out that night and never came home. His body was found 3 days later at the bottom of Eagles Point, a cliff overlooking the city. The police ruled it a suicide. Now standing in his empty apartment 27 years later, Daniel Martinez finally understood the true source of his obsession with the Golden Eagles. It wasn't just about football, it was about the last connection he had to his father. Every time the Eagles lost, Daniel felt his father's pain all over again. Every defeat was a reminder of that terrible night when his childhood ended, and his understanding of love became forever twisted with loss, abandonment, and crushing responsibility. Daniel looked at his reflection in the dark window and saw his father's face staring back at him. The same haunted eyes, the same desperate need for validation, the same willingness to sacrifice everything, including family, for a game played by strangers. "I'm becoming him," Daniel whispered. "I'm becoming the man who destroyed my childhood." For the first time since Sarah left, Daniel began to understand that his problem wasn't just anger or stress. His problem was that he'd spent his entire adult life trying to rewrite the ending of a story that had concluded the night his father walked away forever. The Golden Eagles couldn't bring his father back. Winning couldn't undo the damage. And if he continued down this path, Tommy would grow up with the same scars that had been festering in Daniel's heart for nearly 3 decades. Block 6. The Shocking Family Secret. 3 days later, his mother Eleanor called for the first time in 6 months. Her voice was shaky, uncertain, carrying the weight of secrets buried for nearly 3 decades. "Danny, we need to talk. There are things about your father's death that you don't know." They met at the same diner where Elena used to take Daniel for pancakes after his father's Golden Eagles games. Elena looked older than her 62 years, worn down by decades of carrying the truth alone. "I know you've been struggling since Sarah left," she began, stirring sugar into her coffee with trembling hands. "Carmen called me." Daniel stared at his mother, noting how she avoided his eyes. "What did you need to tell me about, Dad?" Elena took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her words shattered everything Daniel thought he knew about his family's history. "Your father didn't kill himself because the Golden Eagles lost the championship game, Danny. He killed himself because he found out the game was fixed." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Daniel felt the world tilt on its axis. "What are you talking about?" "Miguel had been gambling on Eagles games for months," Elena continued. "Small bets at first, just a few dollars. But as the season went on, the amounts got bigger. By the championship game, he owed some very dangerous people more money than we'd ever seen." Daniel's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor. His entire understanding of his father's death, his own obsession, the very foundation of his identity, was crumbling. "That's impossible. Dad loved the Golden Eagles more than anything." "He didn't bet against them," Elena replied, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He bet on them to win every single game. And when they kept losing, he kept betting bigger amounts, convinced that the next victory would solve all our problems." The full picture began forming in Daniel's mind like a nightmare. His father hadn't been just a passionate fan. He'd been a gambling addict who'd tied his family's financial survival to a football team. "The night of the championship game," Elena continued, "Miguel came home and told me everything. The debt collectors had been calling all week. They'd threatened to hurt you and me if he didn't pay up. Miguel was desperate, terrified." Daniel remembered that night with crystal clarity. His father's breakdown, the way he'd blamed an 8-year-old boy, the emptiness in his eyes. "But that's not even the worst part," Elena whispered. 2 days after Miguel died, a man came to our house. He told me that the championship game had been fixed by a betting syndicate. The Golden Eagles were supposed to lose, and they did exactly what they were paid to do. The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. Not only had his father died for nothing, he died believing in a lie. The game that had destroyed their family had never been real competition at all. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was afraid you'd end up just like him," Elena replied. "I thought if you knew the truth about the gambling, about the fixed games, You might develop the same obsession. I thought I was protecting you. But Elena's protection had backfired catastrophically. For 27 years, Daniel had carried misplaced guilt, believing that somehow his presence at the championship game had contributed to his father's death. He'd spent his entire adult life trying to prove that he was a better fan than his father, more loyal, more devoted. He'd convinced himself that if he just believed hard enough, his team would finally reward his faith. But it had all been built on a lie. The Golden Eagles weren't a team worth dying for. They were just another business willing to manipulate their fans' emotions for profit. Leave a comment below and let me know if you've ever discovered that something you believed in your whole life turned out to be completely different than what you thought, because what Daniel learns next will change everything about how he sees himself and his future. I need you to understand something else, Elena said, reaching across the table. The night your father died, he made me promise to never let you become like him. He was lucid at the end, Danny. He knew what his obsession had cost our family, and he begged me to make sure you didn't follow the same path. Daniel stared at his mother's weathered hands. For 27 years, these same loving hands had carried a secret that might have saved his marriage if shared sooner. Miguel's last words to me weren't about the Golden Eagles, Elena whispered. They were about you. He said, "Don't let Danny make the same mistakes I did. Don't let him think that a game is more important than the people who love him." The irony was devastating. Daniel's father had died trying to teach him a lesson that Daniel had spent his entire adult life refusing to learn. Every time the Golden Eagles lost and Daniel took his rage out on Sarah and Tommy, he'd been dishonoring his father's final wish. Sarah was right to leave, Daniel said, the words tasting like poison. I became the monster Dad was afraid I'd become. It's not too late, Elena replied, squeezing his hands tighter. Your father didn't have the chance to fix his mistakes, but you do. Sarah and Tommy are still alive, Danny. There's still time. As Daniel sat in that diner, holding his mother's hands while the truth rewrote his entire history, he realized he had a choice to make. He could continue down the path his father had started, or he could finally honor Miguel Martinez's dying wish by choosing his family over a game that had never been worth the price they'd all paid. For the first time in 27 years, Daniel Martinez understood that the real enemy wasn't the Golden Eagles' opponents or bad referees. The real enemy was the lie he'd been living, the belief that his worth as a man was tied to the success of people he'd never met, playing a game that had been rigged from the beginning. But understanding the problem and solving it were still two very different things. Block 7, the first real attempt at help. Daniel Martinez stood outside Dr. Helen Vasquez's office for 20 minutes before he finally worked up the courage to open the door. He'd never been to therapy before, never spoken to a professional about the darkness that lived inside his head, but his father had been wrong about a lot of things. Dr. Vasquez was younger than Daniel had expected, with intelligent eyes and an unhurried way of moving that immediately put him at ease. Her office was warm and inviting, filled with books and plants. "Please have a seat wherever you're comfortable," she said. "I know this might feel overwhelming, so we'll take things at your own pace." Daniel chose a chair near the window. "I've never done this before," he admitted. "That's perfectly normal," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Why don't you start by telling me what brought you here today?" The question opened a floodgate. The words came pouring out. Sarah leaving, his father's suicide, the revelation about the fixed championship game, his mother's decades of secrets, and the growing understanding that he'd become the very thing his father had died trying to prevent. Dr. Vasquez listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding, but mostly just giving Daniel the space to unload 27 years of guilt, rage, and confusion. "That's an enormous amount of pain to carry alone," Dr. Vasquez said finally. "Thank you for trusting me with your story. What you're feeling, the anger, the obsession, the violence, these aren't character flaws. They're symptoms of trauma that was never properly addressed." Daniel felt something inside his chest loosen slightly. He'd expected judgment. Instead, he'd found understanding. "So I'm not just a monster?" he asked. "You're a man who learned some very unhealthy coping mechanisms as a child," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Your father's death created a trauma response that you've been carrying for decades. The violence, the obsession with the Golden Eagles, the way you've treated your family, these are all ways your brain has tried to process grief and abandonment that you were too young to understand." For the first time since Sarah left, Daniel felt a tiny spark of hope. If his problems were symptoms rather than character traits, maybe they could be treated. Can it be fixed? Can I become the kind of man Sarah and Tommy deserve? Recovery is possible, Dr. Vasquez said carefully, but it's going to require complete honesty, with me, with yourself, and eventually with your family. It's going to mean examining painful memories and learning new ways to handle your emotions. Most importantly, it's going to mean accepting that your relationship with the Golden Eagles has become toxic. The last part hit Daniel like a punch to the stomach. Give up the Golden Eagles? Stop following the team that had connected him to his father. I don't know if I can do that, he admitted. The Eagles they're all I have left of my dad. I understand, Dr. Vasquez replied. Recovery is a process, Daniel. We'll take it one step at a time. But I want you to consider the possibility that your real connection to your father isn't through a football team. It's through the love he had for you, the lessons he wanted you to learn, and the man he hoped you'd become. Daniel spent the next 45 minutes talking about his childhood, his marriage, and the moment he realized he'd become his father's worst nightmare. Dr. Vasquez asked gentle questions that helped him see patterns, how his father's death had taught him that love was conditional, how his obsession was really an attempt to control the uncontrollable, how his violence was actually misdirected rage at a father who'd abandoned him. When the session ended, Dr. Vasquez handed him a card with her contact information. I want you to call me if you feel the urge to hurt yourself or anyone else, day or night. Promise me you'll reach out before you do anything destructive. Daniel took the card and nodded. What happens now? Now you go home and think about what we've discussed. If you decide you want to continue this work, we'll schedule another session for next week. But Daniel, therapy only works if you're committed to change. I can't want your recovery more than you do. As Daniel walked to his car, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. For the first time since Sarah left, he had a sense of direction, a plan for moving forward, but he also understood that this was just the beginning of a very long and difficult journey. That night, Daniel did something he hadn't done in 27 years. He went to sleep without checking the Golden Eagles' scores. Instead, he lay in his empty bed and thought about his father's final words, about Sarah's courage in leaving, about Tommy's terrified eyes during their last night as a family. He thought about the man he'd become and the man he wanted to be. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel Martinez fell asleep without the weight of his team's performance pressing down on his chest like a stone. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. Block 8. The ultimate test. 6 months later, Daniel Martinez stood in the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie with hands that no longer shook when the Golden Eagles were mentioned. 6 months of therapy, support groups, and the hardest work of his life had transformed him from the inside out. But today would be the ultimate test of everything he'd learned. Dr. Vasquez had suggested it 3 weeks ago during one of their sessions. Daniel, you've made incredible progress. You understand your triggers, you've developed healthy coping mechanisms, and you've been sober for 4 months. But there's one test we haven't faced yet. The Golden Eagles Championship Final, Daniel had replied, his stomach clenching at the thought. Exactly, and not just watching it. I think you should attend the game. In person, at the same stadium where your father took you as a child. The suggestion had terrified Daniel more than anything he'd faced in recovery. Return to Eagles Stadium, watch his former obsession play in the most important game of the season. It seemed like deliberately walking into a forest fire. But Dr. Vasquez had convinced him that facing his deepest fear was the only way to prove to himself, and potentially to Sarah and Tommy, that he was truly a different man. Now, as Daniel walked through the parking lot toward Eagles Stadium, he felt a familiar electricity in the air. Thousands of fans streamed toward the entrance wearing golden jerseys and chanting fight songs that had once made Daniel's heart race with anticipation and dread. But something was different this time. Instead of the crushing weight of expectation that used to press down on his chest, Daniel felt only curiosity. How would he react? What would he feel when the Golden Eagles inevitably faced a crucial moment in the game? His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Vasquez. Remember what we practiced, breathing exercises. Acknowledge the feelings without judgment. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are the observer of both. Call me if you need to. Daniel smiled and put the phone away. 6 months ago, he would have thrown it against the wall for interrupting his pre-game ritual. Today, it felt like a lifeline from someone who cared about his well-being more than any sports outcome. As he found his seat, deliberately chosen in a section he'd never sat in before to avoid triggering specific memories, Daniel looked around at the other fans. He saw fathers with their young sons, wearing matching jerseys and sharing popcorn. He saw groups of friends laughing and drinking beer. He saw couples holding hands. enjoying a night out together. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel Martinez saw a football stadium not as a temple where his worth as a man would be determined, but as a place where people came to have fun with the people they loved. The thought hit him like a revelation. He could have brought Tommy here, not to create another obsessive fan, but to share an experience together, to teach his son that games were entertainment, not life or death struggles that determined a family's happiness. But those opportunities were gone now. Sarah had made that clear in the one phone call she'd accepted from him 3 months ago. "I'm proud of you for getting help, Daniel," she'd said, her voice carefully neutral. "I really am. But Tommy and I have built a new life here in Portland. He's in a good school, he's made friends, and for the first time in years he doesn't flinch when someone raises their voice. I can't risk undoing that progress." "I understand," Daniel had replied, meaning it. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking for anything except the chance to show you somehow that I'm not the man who drove you away. Maybe someday," Sarah had whispered. "Maybe when enough time has passed. But not now, Daniel. Not yet." The conversation had ended there, but it hadn't destroyed Daniel the way it would have 6 months earlier. Instead, it had motivated him to continue his recovery, not for the promise of getting his family back, but for the certainty that he deserved to be healthy, regardless of whether he ever saw Sarah and Tommy again. The Golden Eagles took the field, and Daniel felt his pulse quicken slightly, but not with the manic energy that used to consume him. This was just excitement, the same feeling he might have when watching any entertaining performance. The game began, and for the first quarter, Daniel found himself genuinely enjoying the experience. The athleticism was impressive, the strategy was interesting, and the crowd's energy was infectious in a positive way. But then in the second quarter, something happened that would have once destroyed Daniel's entire world. The Golden Eagles' star player, Marcus Rodriguez, the team's best hope for victory, went down with what looked like a serious knee injury. The stadium fell silent as Rodriguez writhed on the ground, clearly in significant pain. Daniel felt a familiar darkness creeping into the edges of his mind. The old voice, the one that had controlled him for so many years, began to whisper, "This is it. This is how they lose. This is how everything falls apart again." His breathing became shallow. His hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Daniel Martinez was 8 years old again, watching his father's face crumble as their team's championship dreams died on the field. But then he heard Dr. Vasquez's voice in his head. "Acknowledge the feelings without judgment. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer." Daniel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, he saw the situation clearly for what it was. Not a cosmic injustice that demanded his rage, but simply an unfortunate injury to a young athlete who was probably scared and in pain. "I hope he's okay," Daniel said aloud, surprising himself. The elderly man sitting next to him nodded in agreement. "Looked like his knee buckled," the man replied. "Hate to see that happen to anybody, regardless of which team they play for." Daniel stared at the stranger. In his years as an obsessive fan, he had never once expressed genuine concern for an injured player's well-being. Every injury had been viewed through the lens of how it would affect his team's chances of winning, never as a human being experiencing pain and fear. Rodriguez was helped off the field, and the Golden Eagles continued playing without their star. They struggled, clearly affected by the loss of their best player. By halftime, they were down by 14 points. In the old days, Daniel would have been consumed with rage by now. He would have been mentally preparing the list of scapegoats, the coaching staff, the backup players, the referees, even Sarah for not being there to provide proper support. Instead, Daniel found himself thinking about Rodriguez's family, probably watching from somewhere in the stadium or at home, worried about their son's injury and future career. He thought about the backup players, probably nervous but excited for their chance to contribute. He thought about the coaches, doing their best to adjust their game plan on the fly. For the first time in his life, Daniel Martinez was seeing a football game not as a reflection of his own worth, but as a human drama involving real people with real hopes and fears and families who loved them. The third quarter was brutal. The Golden Eagles fell further behind, and several more key players were injured or made costly mistakes. The crowd began to turn ugly, with fans screaming obscenities and throwing debris onto the field. Daniel watched the anger around him with fascination rather than participation. These people were experiencing the same toxic emotions that had controlled him for decades. The same belief that strangers playing a game somehow reflected on their personal value as human beings. But now from the outside, Daniel could see how pointless and destructive that mindset really was. These fans weren't enjoying themselves, they weren't having fun with friends and family, they were suffering, just as Daniel had suffered for so many years, because they had given control of their emotions to people who didn't even know they existed. As the fourth quarter began, Daniel made a decision that would have been impossible for the old version of himself. He stood up and began walking toward the exit, not because he was angry at the Golden Eagles' performance, not because he couldn't bear to watch them lose, but because he had seen enough to know that he had passed the test. Daniel Martinez could watch his former obsession struggle and fail without feeling like he was struggling and failing. He could observe other people's pain without taking it on as his own. Most importantly, he could choose to leave whenever he wanted, because a football game was no longer the most important thing in his world. As he walked through the stadium concourse, Daniel's phone rang. Dr. Vasquez. "How are you doing?" she asked without preamble. "I'm leaving early," Daniel replied, "but not for the reason you might think. Tell me." I realized that I don't need to punish myself by watching something that doesn't bring me joy, just to prove that I can handle it. The old Daniel would have stayed until the bitter end, suffering through every minute, because he felt like he deserved to suffer. The new Daniel knows that he deserves to be happy, and right now, happiness means going home, making myself a cup of tea, and reading that book you recommended. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, Daniel could hear the smile in her voice. "Daniel," she said, "I think you just graduated from therapy." As Daniel walked to his car, he heard the stadium erupt in confused cheers behind him. Apparently, the Golden Eagles had scored. In the old days, that sound would have sent him running back to his seat, afraid of missing the comeback that would validate his faith and make all his suffering worthwhile. Today, Daniel Martinez just smiled and kept walking toward his new life. Block 9. The True Transformation. 1 year later, Daniel Martinez was painting the walls of his new apartment when he heard familiar voices in the hallway outside. A woman was speaking quietly to a child, and something about the rhythm of their conversation made Daniel's heart skip a beat. He set down his paintbrush and listened more carefully. The woman's voice was giving gentle instructions about being quiet in the hallway, because it was evening and people might be sleeping. The child, a boy, was asking questions about when they could go swimming in the apartment complex's pool. Daniel knew those voices. He would know them anywhere, even after 18 months of separation. Sarah and Tommy were in his building. His first instinct was to throw open the door and run into the hallway to see his wife and son, to beg them to forgive him and come home. But the year of continued therapy and personal growth had taught him something crucial about healthy relationships. Love meant respecting other people's boundaries, even when it caused you pain. Instead, Daniel quietly walked to his window and looked down at the parking lot. There, loading suitcases out of a car with Oregon license plates, he saw the two people he loved most in the world. Sarah looked good, rested, happy even. Her hair was longer than he remembered, and she moved with a confidence that Daniel had never seen during their marriage. The constant tension that had marked her final years with him was gone, replaced by an ease that made Daniel's heart ache with recognition of what his violence had stolen from her. Tommy had grown. He was taller now, with longer legs and the awkward proportions of a boy approaching his teenage years. But more importantly, he looked relaxed in a way that Daniel remembered from his son's very early childhood, before the Golden Eagles games had become sources of terror instead of entertainment. Daniel watched them for several minutes, memorizing every detail. Then he did something that would have been impossible for the man he used to be. He stepped away from the window and went back to painting his walls. If Sarah and Tommy were in his building, they were here for a reason. If that reason involved him, he would find out soon enough. If it didn't, then respecting their privacy was the most loving thing he could do. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at his door. Daniel took a deep breath, checked his appearance in the mirror, and opened the door to find Sarah standing in the hallway. She looked nervous but determined, the way she used to look when she was preparing to have a difficult conversation. "Hello, Daniel," she said quietly. "Hello, Sarah." He resisted the urge to reach for her, to touch her face, to ask 1,000 questions about where she'd been and how she'd been and whether she thought of him. "Would you like to come in?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. For a few minutes. She stepped inside and looked around the small apartment. Daniel had decorated it simply but warmly, with plants and books and photographs that didn't include any Golden Eagles memorabilia. The man who had once covered every surface with team logos and schedules had been replaced by someone who filled his space with things that brought him peace. "You look good," Sarah said, and Daniel could tell she meant it. Healthy, thank you. So do you. Portland agrees with you. It does. Sarah sat down on the edge of his couch, maintaining careful distance. I saw Dr. Martinez at the grocery store last week, your mother. She told me you'd moved to this complex. Daniel nodded. I didn't ask her to tell you, but I won't pretend I'm not glad you know. She said you've been in therapy for over a year, that you haven't missed a single session. That's right. She also said the Golden Eagles made the playoffs this year and you didn't watch a single game. Daniel smiled. Also true. I've discovered I prefer books to football and cooking. I'm learning to cook. Sarah studied his face carefully, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Daniel let her look, understanding that she had every right to be cautious. Trust, once broken, had to be earned back one small action at a time. Why are you here, Sarah? He asked gently. Not that I'm not grateful. Just, I want to understand. Sarah took a shaky breath. Tommy's been asking about you. Not constantly, but more frequently lately. He wants to know if you're okay, if you're getting help, if you ever think about him. Daniel felt tears prick his eyes. Every day. I think about him every day. Dr. Martinez said you've been working with an organization that helps other men who struggle with anger and domestic violence. Is that true? Yes. I facilitate a support group twice a week, men who are where I was a year ago. It helps me stay accountable and it helps them see that change is possible. Daniel paused. I never want another child to be afraid of their father the way Tommy was afraid of me. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've been going to therapy too in Portland, working through my own trauma from what we went through, learning to trust my instincts again, learning to believe I deserve to be treated with kindness. You do deserve that, Daniel said firmly. You always did. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that. My therapist has been suggesting that maybe it would be healthy for Tommy to have some kind of contact with you. Not living together, not immediately, but supervised visits maybe, phone calls, a chance for him to see that you're truly different now. Daniel's heart began to race, but not with the manic energy that used to consume him. This was hope, pure and simple. What do you think? He asked. I think I'm terrified, Sarah replied honestly. I think I'm scared that you'll hurt him again, or that seeing you will undo all the healing he's done. But I also think I'm scared that I'm letting my own fear prevent my son from having a relationship with his father. Daniel leaned forward slightly, careful not to invade her space. Sarah, I need you to know something. I would rather never see Tommy again than risk causing him any more pain. If you decide that contact with me isn't in his best interest, I will respect that decision completely. No arguments, no pressure, no manipulation. His well-being is more important than my desires. Sarah stared at him, and Daniel could see that this response was not what she had expected from the man she had fled from nearly 2 years ago. You really are different, she said wonderfully. I can see it in your eyes. The desperation is gone. The need to control everything is gone. The old Daniel needed the Golden Eagles to win so he could feel like he was winning. The old Daniel needed his family to behave in specific ways so he could feel like he was a good husband and father. This Daniel has learned that real love means wanting the people you care about to be happy and safe, even if their happiness doesn't include you. Sarah began to cry quietly. Not from sadness, Daniel realized, but from relief. The relief of finally seeing evidence that the man she had loved, the man he had been before trauma and obsession, had twisted him into someone unrecognizable, was still in there somewhere. There's a family therapy practice in Portland, Sarah said after she had composed herself. Dr. Chen specializes in reunification after domestic violence. She would want to meet with you several times, evaluate your progress, maybe coordinate with Dr. Vasquez. It would be a slow process, very slow, and there would be rules, lots of rules. I understand, Daniel said. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. Sarah stood up, preparing to leave. I can't promise anything, Daniel. I can't promise that this will work, or that we'll ever be a family again, or that Tommy won't decide he doesn't want a relationship with you. I know, Daniel replied, and that's okay. The fact that you're willing to consider it at all is more than I deserve. Sarah walked to the door, then turned back. For what it's worth, I hope it works out. Not for us. I don't know if there will ever be an us again, but for Tommy. Every child deserves to know that their father loves them and is working to be better. After Sarah left, Daniel sat on his couch and let himself feel the full weight of what had just happened. His son might want to see him again. There was a possibility, however small, that he could earn back the right to be part of Tommy's life. The old Daniel would have started planning immediately, would have begun strategizing ways to speed up the process, would have become obsessed with controlling every variable to ensure the outcome he wanted. The new Daniel simply felt grateful for the opportunity and committed to continuing the work of becoming the kind of man his son could be proud of, regardless of whether Tommy ever chose to have a relationship with him. If you've been following this story, and Daniel's journey has touched your heart in some way, please share this video with someone who might need to hear that change is possible, that people can heal, and that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. That night, Daniel Martinez fell asleep not planning his next move or worrying about things he couldn't control, but simply feeling grateful to be alive, to be healthy, and to have hope for a future that looked nothing like his past. It was the best sleep he'd had in 35 years. Block 10, a new beginning. 6 months later, Daniel Martinez stood in the lobby of Dr. Chen's office in Portland, nervously adjusting his collar for the third time in 5 minutes. Today was the day he had been working toward for nearly 2 years, his first supervised visit with Tommy. The process had been exactly as slow and careful as Sarah had promised. Months of individual sessions with Dr. Chen, psychological evaluations, coordination between his Portland and home therapists, background checks and detailed safety planning. Daniel had completed every requirement without complaint, understanding that each step was necessary to protect his son's well-being. Through it all, Sarah had been cautiously supportive. She attended some of the therapy sessions, helping Dr. Chen understand their family history and Tommy's specific needs. She had also established clear boundaries that Daniel respected completely: no contact outside of the supervised sessions, no gifts or attempts to influence Tommy's feelings about the visits, and absolute honesty about his ongoing recovery work. Tommy, now 11 years old, had been an active participant in deciding whether he wanted to see his father. Dr. Chen had worked with him for months, helping him process his feelings about Daniel and preparing him for what contact might look like. "I remember when Daddy used to be nice sometimes," Tommy had told Dr. Chen during one session that Sarah later shared with Daniel, "before he got so angry all the time. I want to see if he's still in there." Now, as Daniel waited in the family therapy office, he tried to manage his expectations. Tommy might be reserved, angry, or scared. He might have changed so much in the nearly 2 years since Daniel had seen him that he would feel like a stranger. The visit might go poorly, ending the possibility of future contact, but Daniel had learned to find peace with uncertainty. Whatever happened today, he was grateful for the opportunity. Whatever Tommy needed from him, whether it was love, apologies, or distance, Daniel was prepared to provide. The door opened and Dr. Chen emerged with Tommy. Daniel's son was taller than Daniel had expected, with longer hair and the beginnings of adolescent features that made him look heartbreakingly mature. But when Tommy saw his father, his face lit up with a smile that was pure childhood joy. "Hi, Dad," Tommy said, his voice slightly deeper than Daniel remembered, but still carrying the warmth that had once been the best part of Daniel's day. "Hi, son," Daniel replied, fighting back tears. "You look so grown up." Tommy ran forward and hugged Daniel tightly. For a moment, Daniel allowed himself to simply hold his child, memorizing the feeling of Tommy's arms around his waist and the scent of his hair. "I missed you," Tommy whispered. "I missed you too," Daniel whispered back. Every single day, Dr. Chen guided them into her office, a comfortable space filled with games, books, and art supplies designed to help families reconnect in a safe environment. "Tommy," Dr. Chen said, "remember what we talked about. You're in charge of this visit. If you want to stop at any time or if you need a break, just let me know. Your dad understands that too." Tommy nodded seriously, then looked at his father. "Dad, are you still sick?" Daniel had prepared for this question with Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen. They had agreed that honesty, presented in age-appropriate terms, was the best approach. "I'm much better than I was," Daniel said carefully, "but I still go to therapy every week, and I still work very hard every day to make sure I never treat you or your mom the way I did before. It's kind of like, do you remember when you broke your arm when you were 7? Tommy nodded. "Well, your arm healed, but you still had to be careful with it for a while to make sure it stayed strong. My feelings got broken when I was a little boy, and even though they're healing now, I still have to be careful and keep working with doctors to make sure they stay healthy." Tommy considered this seriously. "Is that why you didn't watch any Golden Eagles games this year? Mum told me they went to the playoffs." Daniel smiled. "That's part of it. I realized that watching football used to make me very angry and sad, and that's not good for anyone. So now I do other things that make me happy instead." "Like what?" "Well, I learned how to cook, and I read books, and I help other dads who are learning to manage their feelings better. What about you? What makes you happy? For the next hour, Tommy told his father about his life in Portland, his school, his friends, his favorite books, the swimming lessons he was taking at the community center. Daniel listened with complete attention, asking questions and celebrating his son's accomplishments without trying to insert himself into the narrative. "I'm really proud of you," Daniel said when Tommy finished describing his science fair project about renewable energy. "You've become such a smart, thoughtful person." Tommy beamed at the praise, then grew more serious. "Dad, do you ever think about the night when Mom and I left?" Daniel glanced at Dr. Chen, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, I think about it. Do you want to talk about it?" "I was really scared that night," Tommy said quietly. "You seemed like you weren't you anymore, like something else was living in your body." "I think that's a very good way to describe it," Daniel replied. "The anger and sadness inside me got so big that they took over everything else. But that wasn't your fault, Tommy. None of what happened was your fault." "I know," Tommy said. "Dr. Chen explained that to me. She said sometimes grown-ups have problems that have nothing to do with kids, but kids can get hurt anyway." Daniel felt his chest tighten with gratitude for the therapist who had helped his son understand such a complex situation. "That's exactly right. And I'm sorry that my problems hurt you. You deserve to feel safe in our house, and I didn't make that possible." Tommy was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you going to come back to Portland?" Daniel looked at Dr. Chen, who had explained the parameters of future contact during their planning sessions. "If you want me to, and if your mum thinks it's okay, I can visit once a month for a while. We can spend time together, maybe go to a park or get lunch, but I won't live here, and I won't try to change the life you and your mum have built." "I would like that," Tommy said. "But I want Mum to come too, at least for a while." "Of course," Daniel agreed. "Whatever makes you feel safest." As the visit came to an end, Tommy hugged his father again. "Dad, I'm glad you got better." "Me too, son. Me too." In the parking lot outside Dr. Chen's office, Sarah was waiting by her car. She looked nervous but hopeful. "How did it go?" she asked. "Really well," Daniel replied honestly. "He's an amazing kid, Sarah. You've done an incredible job raising him." Sarah smiled, and for a moment Daniel saw a flash of the woman he had fallen in love with 15 years ago. "We both contributed to making him who he is, Daniel. The good parts of you were always there too." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Tommy play on a nearby playground. He was laughing, carefree in a way that Daniel remembered from before the Golden Eagles had poisoned their family's happiness. "I know this doesn't fix everything," Daniel said quietly. "I know there's still so much damage that can't be undone, but thank you for giving me the chance to be his father again." "Thank you for becoming someone worthy of that chance," Sarah replied. As Daniel drove back to his hotel, he reflected on how different this homecoming felt from anything he had imagined during the early days of his recovery. He wasn't getting his old life back. Sarah had made it clear that their romantic relationship was over, and Tommy would continue living in Portland with his mother. But he was getting something potentially more valuable, the opportunity to build new, healthy relationships with the people he loved. His phone rang as he pulled into the hotel parking lot. "Dr. Vasquez, how did the visit go?" she asked. "Better than I dared to hope," Daniel said. "He wants to see me again. I'm so proud of you, Daniel. 2 years ago, you were a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in things you couldn't control: your team's performance, your family's behavior, other people's approval. Today, you're someone who finds joy in other people's happiness, even when that happiness doesn't directly benefit you." Daniel smiled. "I learned from the best teacher." "You learned because you were willing to do the work. That's all you, Daniel." That night in his hotel room, Daniel Martinez did something he hadn't done in years. He called his mother and told her about his day, not because he needed her to fix anything or validate his feelings, but because he wanted to share his joy with someone who loved him. "I'm so proud of you, mijo," Elena said through tears. "Your father would be proud too." "I think so," Daniel replied. "I think I finally became the man he wanted me to be." After hanging up, Daniel looked out his hotel window at the city lights of Portland. Somewhere out there, his son was probably getting ready for bed, maybe telling his mother about their visit. Sarah was probably tucking him in, reassuring him that he was safe and loved. Daniel Martinez had spent most of his adult life trying to control outcomes, manipulate circumstances, and force the world to match his expectations. Tonight, he felt a deep peace that came from accepting things as they were while working steadily to become the person he was meant to be. The Golden Eagles had won their playoff game that weekend. Daniel found out 3 days later when a co-worker mentioned it in passing. For a split second he felt a tiny flicker of the old excitement. Then it faded, replaced by satisfaction that his former obsession could achieve success without causing him any pain or joy. He was finally free. 2 years from now, Tommy might decide he wanted to live with his father part-time, or he might decide that monthly visits were enough contact for their relationship. Sarah might eventually forgive Daniel enough to become friends again, or she might maintain polite distance forever. Daniel Martinez didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in his adult life, that uncertainty didn't frighten him. He had learned to find happiness in the present moment, to love people without trying to control them, and to define his worth by his own actions rather than external circumstances. The boy who had watched his father destroy himself over a football game had grown into a man who understood that the only victory that truly mattered was the daily choice to be better than you were yesterday. And in that game, Daniel Martinez was finally, undeniably, winning.